I've never forgotten how this question of Thucydides' pessimism came up during my first semester of teaching a humanities course in the fall of 1969. His history of this brutal struggle between the alliances of Athens and Sparta from 431 to 404 BC by our reckoning was especially relevant to 1969 because the United States was then embroiled in its own grueling war. In the midst of our class discussion, a young woman asked plaintively, "Doesn't Thucydides give us any hope?" I was young then, thought I knew Thucydides pretty well from graduate school, but I found the question hard and I didn't answer it very well. Consequently, it was always on my mind as I read and taught Thucydides in the next 40 years. So tonight I will try to make amends by arguing that yes, Thucydides is severe, but that he gives us an enlightening, useful, and convincing theory of human behavior in the face of historical circumstances. It is a theory that fits not just the Peloponnesian War, but war in general, and in fact all manner of human action. Thucydides does not wait long to make the kind of statement that elicited the student's question about hope. In his introduction, he ends an outline of his purpose and method with this bold summary, including a partial statement of his theory. It may well be that my history will seem less easy to read because of the absence in it of storytelling, probably in allusion to Herodotus and predictive of Dionysius and those other bored readers. It will be enough for me, however, if these words of mine are judged useful by those who want to understand clearly the events which happened in the past and which, human nature being what it is, will at some time or other, and in much the same ways, be repeated in the future. My work is not a showpiece for a temporary audience, but a possession for all time. It is clear that Thucydides' term here for humanity, to anthropinon, the first one on your handout, usually translated as I translated here, human nature, is synonymous with his later verbatim term, physis anthropon, literally nature of humans. The term physis, nature, rooted in the Greek verb meaning to grow, has several shades of meaning in ancient literature. But the context of its uses by Thucydides shows that he means by human nature not just inherited characteristics, but rather the constitution of a person that is the result of genetics and experience at any point in that person's development. In popular psychologies, nature and nurture. It shares elements of what we call character, temperament, and personality. So this is the meaning of Thucydides, and it's the one I intend when I talk about human lecture here, or human nature here. There are some key corollaries of this meaning. There is a unique nature of each person and a unique collective nature of any group. And these natures allow no quick or easy change. For example, in Thucydides, we read of such individual and collective natures respectively in the funeral oration, where Pericles says it is risky to praise the war dead, in part because a person of limited ability will, out of jealousy, take as exaggeration anything beyond the reach of his own physis, his nature. And the second collective statement is that of the Corinthians at the Spartan conference just before the war. They say that they have an immediate advantage over the Athenians. Quote, the valor we have by nature, physis, they cannot get by education. By this perseverance of nature, does Thucydides mean that the future events he forecasts are particularly predestined? I don't think so. His conditional note that some may judge his words useful indicates that his history is didactic, and its usefulness is not just the gain of scientific knowledge for its own sake, or even the scholarly science of connecting actions that have consequences in the past, but beyond that, the understanding of history's lessons and the putting of them into action. I think Thucydides' remark that events will be repeated in the future and that his work is a possession for all time, refer not just to his work's usefulness in the future of Thucydides and the future of any reader, but also to the future of all readers. In this interpretation, I part with some modern commentators in favor of the political philosopher Thomas Hobbes, who argued in the preface to his English translation of the Peloponnesian War. This is the early 18th century. It is the first translation of Thucydides into English from Greek, where he says, "The principal and proper work of history is to use the past in order to instruct men, that the principal and proper work to bear themselves prudently in the present and providently toward the future. And Thucydides does this naturally and more fully than anyone else." Thucydides then is giving us both a particular history and a universal theory of social psychology. Of course, humans cannot be exact prophets, and Thucydides, with the words, quote, "at some time or other and in much the same ways," end quote, emphasizes that the timing and form of future events are not closely predictable. Indeed, one of the leitmotifs of his history is that unforeseen turns of events are especially common in war and other kinds of social disorder. His history is not cyclical. It's not about the regular rise and fall of civilizations. It is, in fact, about a history that is linear with frequent repetitions that are irregular in timing and in form. And the line of that history lacks any notion of constant and permanent moral improvement. It is only in his account of the 4th year of the war, when the civil strife between pro-Athenian and pro-Spartan factions on the island of CYA, modern Corfu, became particularly violent, that Thucydides returns to his theory, this time with added clarifications. In his favored inductive method, where concrete historical facts form the basis for larger moral abstractions, the atrocities of both parties on CYA move him to a peroration on the progressive symptoms of war and civil strife in general. Here I paraphrase some of these. In the politics of war, human nature, in the politics of human violence, words must change their usual meanings. What used to be thought was aggression is now called courage. To be thoughtful and patient is to be called a coward. The reasonable proposal of an opponent is not only ungenerously received, but every care is taken that it should have no effect. The chaos of war is a climate for avenging old offenses. It is a time for resolutions that secure the coveted property of one's neighbors. Thucydides introduces these reflections with a virtual paraphrase of his earlier proposition about human nature. This time he uses the fuller term physis anthropon, saying, "In the various cities these revolutions were the cause of many calamities, as happens and always will happen while human nature is what it is." Then he adds to his theoretical framework a simple but crucial element that is also an innovation in Greek thought, and that is the factor of variable circumstances to which human nature responds. The word he uses for circumstances here is the first on that handout, I syntychiai, literally happenings. He says, there may be greater or less violence as every new combination of circumstances arises. Thucydides' narrative makes clear that these circumstances can be either man-made, such as political conditions, or they can be accidents of nature, such as weather or earthquakes. Thucydides then gives us the good news that he only implied earlier when allowing that some might judge his words useful. That is, that war need not always be on the immediate horizon, that variant circumstances can also evoke peaceful human behavior,